Welcome to everybody just joining us now. If you just bear with us a moment while we let everybody in from the waiting room, and then I'll introduce our speaker for the day, and we'll get started in just a minute. Okay, so thank you to everybody for joining us today for our virtual talk. If I could just remind everyone to keep themselves muted throughout the presentation unless our speaker invites any dialogue or conversation. And then of course, at the end, you may unmute yourself to ask questions. If you have any questions, you can also type them into the chat box at the bottom of our screen, and our speaker will be happy to address questions and comments at the end of the program. If you're joining us over Facebook Live, welcome to you as well. Our Facebook audience can also ask questions using the comment section on Facebook. And we will also be monitoring those and answering those questions at the end of the program as well. Please note that this talk is being recorded and streamed live and will be posted to our social media channels once the talk is over. If you would like to rewatch this talk or watch previous virtual talks, please check out our YouTube and Facebook pages. With that, I'm excited to announce our speaker to you, Susan. Her talk today is entitled Decoding the Great Masterpieces of the Timken. So I will hand it over to you, and thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you for the invitation. Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to speak to you this morning. I'm Susan Tiefenbrunn, and we're going to start with the first floor of the Timken Museum, which you see in front of you. And I'm going to look at the 4 tapestries from the series Stories of Queen Artemisia. So let's get to the second slide, or the first slide. Yes, these are absolutely magnificent tapestries. I can't speak to you in great detail about them. They are from a series of at least 18 tapestries made in Paris to decorate the palace of Duke Charles Emmanuel I of Savoy, who died in 1630. And that palace is located in Turin, Italy. The 4 tapestries actually illustrate episodes from the stories of Queen Artemisia, which is an epic tale. The tapestry was woven sometime between 1611 and 1620 in France, the great 17th century, the golden age of literature and art in France under the reign of course, Louis XIV. And the central designs were by a man called Antoine Caron, and the border designs were probably by Henry Lurambert, and the cartoons were drawn by various French artists in France around 1600 to 1617. But I did want to point out that it's woven with dyed and undyed wool, silk threads, and silver and gold, real silver, real gold, metallic. It's fabulous to see these images in our Timken Museum. Today, I'm going to start with a more detailed account of the icons in the Russian gallery. They are probably the most extraordinary art pieces in the gallery, in the whole museum. And the Timken Museum has one of the largest and most important collections of Russian icons in the world, thanks to the Putnam sisters, who collected them during the 1930s through the 1980s. After the Russian Revolution, you remember 1917, Russia was very poverty-stricken, and they were very happy to sell and make money out of selling Russian icons. And one of these 2 sisters actually majored in French literature and French art history. And so she loved, not French, Russian, sorry, Russian art history. And so she was very happy to collect these icons. What are icons? Can we switch to the Deis's icons? Yeah, right here. What are these icons? Well, they are sacred images from the Greek word image or resemblance. And iconostasis is the Russian word for a sanctuary screen with icons displayed on it. And icons are used in religious devotion, mostly in the cultures of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Icons are paintings on wood of holy figures, such as Christ, the Virgin Mary, saints, and angels. And as I said earlier, we have one of the largest and most important collections of Russian icons in the world. And if you look at the iconostasis here at the top, Jesus, Mary, and the saints are represented in the icons. And when they're in the churches, they're often illuminated by lamps and candles, and the faithful usually kneel before these icons. They cross themselves to symbolize the Trinity, and they kiss the icons. The icon is a sign of the presence of God, and icons are believed to be divinely revealed. Deesis icons are all tilted as if in reverence to God. Look at the top 6 figures. That's the Deesis icons. And all the heads are tilted. And the reason the heads are tilted because they are in reverence to God. Notice that in the icons, the figures are drawn in a rather flat Byzantine style with little or no conventional perspective. They're full of religious symbolism, and these are spiritual figures rather than ordinary people, and they are depicted in a very idealized fashion. The Deesis icon that you see in front of you are dated back to the 15th century, 1400s, and they were done in the Novgorod school in Russia. The Deesis tier of an iconostasis and the royal gates, which you see below, the royal gates, are both works of art of the 15th century of the same Novgorodian school that form a dominant exposition of the Timken icon collection. The Deesis is the prayer row, consisting here of 6 separate icons, looking at the top, 6 separate icons, with the Savior enthroned as the 7th icon in the middle. These 7 icons are all made of tempera on wood, and the golden background of the 6 icons surrounding the Savior enthroned symbolizes the spiritual world, which is divinely inspired, which is radiant. The golden halos surrounding each of these figures also symbolize the grandeur, the magnificence of heaven, where there is no evil, where there is no darkness. The Deesis of the prayer row is the first row in the iconostasis, that screen which when you enter the church is located. And it's also located in the Timken Museum above another icon called the Royal Gates. Now let's look at the Royal Gates, please, which is the next slide. Really an extraordinary work. The Royal Gates are the Tsar's doors, and they are set in the center of the iconostasis. They're called the Royal Gates because Christ, who is the King of Glory, is represented by his priests, and he enters the royal gates that lead to the altar. Only clergy may pass through the royal gates. They were made again in the Novgorod school in the 15th century. They're made of wood, carved with 3 registers on each half. The doors depict the Annunciation at the top, where the Archangel Gabriel is announcing to the Virgin Mary that she is to become the mother of Jesus, the Son of God. The other 4 panels represent the evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now let's look at the next slide, which is an extraordinarily beautiful slide, a large 17th century icon of now the Moscow school, and it's called the Jerusalem Mother of God, or also sometimes called the Georgian Mother of God. It's depicted in the pose of the Hodagetria, a Greek word for the pointer of the way. See her hand? She's pointing to Jesus. This is an icon of the Virgin Mary, pointing with her right hand to the Christ child, because he is the way, the truth, and the light. Mary, Mother of God, holds the Christ child on her left leg as they both look tenderly at each other, her head tilted in reverence to Jesus. Mary's right hand gestures towards Jesus, and this is interpreted as she who shows us the way. This icon first appeared in the Sofia Cathedral in Novgorod as a gift from Prince Vladimir Sviatoslavich. It was loved by everyone. Ivan the Terrible, though, transferred the icon to the Dormitian Cathedral in the Moscow Kremlin. He placed it in one of the pillars there. Jesus, if you look closely at the young child, offers his mother a small sheaf of wheat, which is a symbol of the bread of the Eucharist. In his left hand, Christ holds a white scroll of his teachings. Of course, this scroll represents the Old Testament's law, and Jesus is the fulfillment of the Old Testament law. And the letters on either side of the Virgin's head, which again I said is tilted, means Maria, Mother of God. And the letters above Christ's halo, notice those two halos, which are embroidered with 3 stars. Those letters signify IC, XC, signify Jesus Christ. Mary wears a green undergarment and a red mephorion embroidered with 3 stars. She has 3 stars on her garment because these symbolize her virginity before, during, and after the birth of Christ, signifying and symbolizing, of course, the Immaculate Conception. Both Mary and Jesus have golden halos. And one of the most striking features of this extraordinary icon are the holes that you see, the many, many holes. They look like holes made with nails. These holes indicate that the icon once had been overlaid with a basma oclad cover. Basma is gilded silver, usually made in small squares or long strips to cover the background of an icon. That was to protect it. It was attached with very small, thin silver nails. The Jerusalem Mother of God is a favorite icon of Georgian Christians, Georgia being a part of the Russian Empire. And it is often referred to as the Georgian Mother of God in 18th and 19th century Russia. And I'm sure you will agree, if you have a chance to see this fabulous icon, to study it carefully. It's really quite extraordinary. Now, let's move on to the Italian gallery and look at one of my favorite paintings here, probably because it was done in the great era of the Italian Renaissance in the 16th century. It is called The Portrait of a Lady in a Green Dress by Bartolomeo Veneto, a great Italian Renaissance painter, and he painted this in 1530. Bartolomeo Veneto is a Renaissance master. This portrait is the last signed work of his. It's probably the final portrait by Bartolomeo, as well as one of his best preserved works, and we have it at the Timken. Portraits of individuals were very popular in Italy and in Northern Europe in general in the period of the Renaissance. There is some question as to the identity of the sitter in the portrait, but the lady in this portrait is quite magnificent. She has a commanding gaze. She's wearing very beautiful, opulent clothing. Her elaborate and exotic headdress is very richly decorated, and it sits on the top of her neatly coiffed brown hair like a crown of curls. This hairpiece has blue and gold ribbons on it with a white bow and a jeweled pin in the center. Her hairstyle is very simple, just a part in the middle, and her hair is drawn back smoothly over her temples. Her very lush green dress is made of silk. Her enormous hair covering and her long blue lapis lazuli rosary beads, lapis lazuli being a very important semi-precious stone. They serve as her necklace, and her 2 golden rings are all quite lavish and extraordinary. These details reveal the lady's high social status. Any problem with the reception of my voice? You've got it? I'm hearing a bad Okay, I'll go on. The puffy sleeves, the very big sleeves, they have long cuts in them. They reveal a rich white lining, which is embroidered beautifully in black and shown clearly at her wrist. She wears an Eastern style shimmering golden shoulder covering, which is called a bravero. Notice this is not no décolleté. She's very proper, and she has very white skin because she's very, very noble. On her right hand, she wears a falconer glove, and she holds the other glove in her left hand. Her rich and costly clothing reveal that she is a lady of high birth, possibly ready to go out to or just having returned from the hunt. A powerful light directed from the left of the painting illuminates the very natural features of this fine lady, which are sculpted with deep shadows. She's depicted from a slightly elevated vantage point, and that also gives her a lot of stature. She's obviously noble, and she's presented as a real person, not like the figures we saw in the icons in Russia. This is a real person, not an all allegorical beauty. Her head is turned to 3/4, as if her attention is drawn to an onlooker. Her gaze and the very angled gaze in her eyes, as well as her quizzical expression, seem to say she is very suspicious about something. This draws our attention to her very physical and even psychological presence on the canvas, a far cry from the figures you saw earlier in the 15th and 14th centuries in the Russian icons, which were flat and lacking any depth in psychology. She has an air of regal authority. She has an air of magnificence, probably due to her 3/4 length appearance on the canvas. And the actual identity of this sitter is, as I said, controversial. One scholar suggests that she is Maria Paleologo, the heiress of Monferrato. And it's one of my favorite paintings in the museum. Let's go now to the next painting by Il Guercino. It is in the Italian gallery, and it's called The Return of the Prodigal Son. The artist's real name is not Il Guercino, it's Giovanni Francesco Barbieri. Il Guercino is a nickname which means squinty-eyed. He was greatly influenced by great artists in Italian Renaissance and earlier, Carracci, Caravaggio, as well as the naturalism of artists in Bologna. And his chief competitor in Bologna was an artist named Guido Reni. But after Reni's death in 1642, Il Guercino became the head of the Bolognese school of painting. The Return of the Prodigal Son was done right smack in the middle of the 17th century, from 1654 to 1655, about 10 years before Il Guercino's death. Now, you probably know the parable upon which this painting is based. It's taken from the New Testament, which teaches the virtues of forgiveness, repentance, and mercy. The father, who you see in the middle of the painting, had 2 sons. He divided his big estate between the 2 sons, but the younger son, who you see to his right, is but the younger son spent all his money very young and squandered his portion by living a scandalous life until he became totally impoverished. He was actually reduced to tending pigs and eating their slops coming from this very wealthy family. The younger son here in this painting is penitent when he returns home to his understanding and merciful father, who lends a hand to the hand of his sad and remorseful son. The father has told his servant here to draw the curtain, perhaps to hide the younger son's shame. The servant is just behind the father, who's dressed in magnificent robes and a blue turban, and even the servant, who has clothing that is finer than this practically naked son. He tells the servant at the end to get some fine clothes and to kill a fatted calf to make a feast. But when the elder son returns, and that isn't in this portrait, he's very angry. He has to be calmed down by his father, who explains that his brother was once dead and he is now alive. He was lost, and he now is found. Guercino painted the subject of the return of the prodigal son 6 times. This painting in the Timken is filled with a real sense of pathos and tenderness. The father is dressed in what looks like purple silk robes with a red lining that is draped over one shoulder. And he tries to drape over his red clothing over his son's naked and bare-chested body. His father wears a blue turban, has a very long beard, signifying his advanced age and wisdom, and he holds his son's outstretched hand to comfort him. The son is crying. He holds a simple white cloth to his eyes. The head is bent to one side in shame. He's crying. And his scanty clothes reveal his impoverishment in contrast to the elegant clothes of the father. The boy's pants are torn and short. He covers his waist with a short white cloth. The painting shows a little bit of blue sky in the right-hand corner. Very important, that little bit of blue sky, because it symbolizes the virtue of penitence and forgiveness. The servant's clothes are more elaborate than the prodigal son's clothes. The servant wears a white shirt with a black trim and blue trousers with slits. The father is merciful. Father is understanding of the son who is grieving over his lost fortune and his wicked lifestyle. This characters in this painting are drawn with great skill and naturalism. Just look, for example, at the hand, at the body and the chest of this young son, and the father's hands with the veins showing so clearly. The anatomy of the prodigal son is extraordinary, as how it is depicted by Il Guercino. The shadows on his left arm and on his chest under his left arm are well represented. His long brown curly hair reminds us once again that he's still a child, and his tears confirm the soulful depiction of his repentance. The imagery in this painting is powerful. It is quite classical in style and very emotional. An extraordinary work. Well, let's move on to the French Gallery, and I will give you a little hint. I have a special love of the French Gallery because I have a doctorate in French literature of the 17th century. And like the famous painter David, who got the Chevalier de la Légion d'honneur, which is the Legion of Honor, the French Legion of Honor, the highest award given to anyone in the French population. I too have it, and I brought it with me just to show up just a little bit. Here's my French Legion of Honor award, and it was the happiest day of my life. I invited Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Antonin Scalia to come to see me knighted, and I'll tell you why it happened, by the way. Ruth was unfortunately teaching in Paris at the time, and I was down in Nice to get this award, so she couldn't come, but Antonin Scalia did come. So here's a painting of one of my favorite artists, Claude Lorrain, and this is a pastoral landscape that was done from 1646 to 1647. Louis XIV came in 1642, the great Sun King. So here we are in the middle of the great golden age of French art and French literature. This painting is a pastoral landscape. It is a painting done by a 17th century painter, a printmaker, and an art theorist who is admired for his Baroque classical landscapes and his emphasis on the dramatic contrast of light and dark, light and shade. If you notice, the top part of the painting is very light, the middle part is very dark, and that contrast is what he focused on. He was known as the great master of the ideal landscape painting. This painting represents an idyllic view of nature, which is even more beautiful and harmonious than nature itself. Let's look at this painting for a moment. You'll see how balanced it is, which is the essence of French classical painting. Balance, moderation, temperance. you have this foreground full of peasant figures, 3 to the left, 2 to the right, but 2 dogs sort of filling out the same space. You have the dark middle ground is starting to lighten up. The figures are very, very small. And suddenly this whiteness comes out of the white cow that the shepherd is leading to somewhere. You see in the background a river. You see a fort, a sign of antiquity, of classicism. And to the left of the shepherd in shepherd's clothing, with the dogs, one dog behind him, one dog in front of him, a little woman dressed in a blue dress with a basket on top of her head. She has a white collar. So the only whiteness we see here is from the cow, from the white collar of the woman, and then we have some whiteness next to the group of 3. Someone, a servant, is or a lover is tending to one of the women seated on a rock, getting her toenails done or her feet washed, and a woman standing up there behind her. This style of the pastoral landscape is typical of the high Baroque classicism. And what are the characteristics of Baroque art? It's grandeur, sensuousness, rich sensuousness, drama. Remember, there's a lot of contrast between light and dark, vitality, movement. That shepherd is moving his stock, his cows, and you can feel the movement in the water below and in the sky with the clouds and the white clouds that are adding light to the painting. Tension, emotional exuberance, many of which are seen in this painting. Classicism in art generally refers to a high regard for the classical period, the Roman and the Greek classics. And that's why we see that Roman fort in the background. Why do they go backwards to Rome and Greece to depict it? We want to set standards for good taste with an emphasis on balance, harmony, and moderation. Nothing too extraordinary, very moderated. And I think you see that in the Claude Lorrain painting. By the way, Claude Lorrain was had a special feeling for the countryside, but his mode of life was that of a bourgeois. He was disciplined, quiet, good-hearted, very industrious. People liked him. He was amiable, but he was shrewd. He was surrounded by a modest household and keenly sought after as an artist. He had only 2 students, but he lived a comfortable life and he amassed a comfortable fortune. His influence can also be seen in the works of certain English landscape painters of the 19th century. Claude's normal method of nature study was by, believe it or not, he drew what he saw, went out at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning in nature, lay down, looking around him, and started to draw what he saw. And you'll see the dark mass of foliage on one side in the foreground contrasted with a misty, sunlit distance on the other. Herdsmen here are tending cattle or goats. They move out from beneath the trees or sit beside a stream. He never married, Claude. He was a working artist. He lived for his work. He was on good terms with Nicolas Poussin, another French master of the ideal landscape, but there was very little contact between them. Claude was basically a loner, concentrating on mastering his art of the ideal landscape, and he worked in Rome. Now let's come to a completely different style of a French master called François Boucher. This is a Rococo painting. It's just beautiful. It's one of my favorites. It's got so much color, so much passion, so much movement in the people, the larger people sitting here with the Amorini behind them. You can see the sky, the blue sky, the white tufted clouds, but you also see the women with each of them have their head sort of tilted with their beautiful white skin. These are noble women. These are not servants, but they're supposed to be servants, lovers in a park, but they're all dressed in very beautiful clothing. The Rococo, the décolleté neckline exhibits their breasts, their beautiful white skin. They're all sort of in the park, in nature, moving out of the court. And this is 18th century. This is 1758 at the time, after, just before the French Revolution. Louis XV absolutely loved Francois Boucher's paintings, and his mistress, the French, have a lot of mistresses then and probably now too. It's part of the culture. Madame de Pompadour loved this painting, which won the Prix de Rome. And remember, there was a lot of movement between artists from France to Rome. Claude Lorrain painted that beautiful landscape that we saw, the ideal landscape, depicting a day in Rome. So this is not the classical style. This is the opposite of classical. This is Rococo. This is something that Jean-Louis David, the great neoclassical painter, will eventually reject. He said this Rococo style, this exuberance, it's too whimsical, it's too frivolous, it's not serious enough for great painting. This painting, however, displays Boucher's striking brushwork, amazing sense of color. Look at those pastels, the pinks, the blues, the orange, the little King Charles Cavalier Spaniel, the Amorini above it, almost with the depiction of the body of the Amorini, almost like a Michelangelo sculpture. This garden is a symbol of romantic love. And that's what the Amorini symbolize, earthly love. The garden is romantic, and it's represented also by the blue wreath that the female lover is wearing on her arm. There's also a green dried up wreath hanging from one of the branches of the tree, perhaps a symbol of their dying love. Notice the man wearing red robes and the woman wearing beautiful dresses with lots of folds and drapery, magnificence and excess and grandeur. The guy's got his pants rolled up and his not even looking at his lover. He's looking at this maiden who walks by. She's got bare feet. The young woman sitting next to the lover also has bare feet. Again, a very subtle sign of eroticism that is so characteristic of this plush magnificence of the Rococo style. Very different from the classical Baroque. The flowers in the lover's hair are forget-me-nots, maybe because the lover has obviously forgotten about his beloved. And this male is looking out at the new gal in town coming down the way. Placing lovers in a lush, busy garden with a stream, plenty of rich green trees and bushes and little rocks is a Rococo version of the painterly tradition of depicting lovers in a garden. A tradition that I might say goes back to the medieval period. The two women here are dressed in delicate pastels of blue, pink, and yellow. The man is wearing a red cape, again, another sign of arrogance and aristocracy, with a white lining revealed at the lower end of his rolled up sleeves. The rolled up sleeves, again, this repose, this relaxation, which comes with the sign of the erotic. The creamy folds in the seated woman's clothing, the richly drawn details of the foliage on the trees, the bushes reveals Boucher's unparalleled virtuosity as a Rococo painter. The women's dresses are satin. They're voluminous, full of carefully drawn folds. The fabrics in this painting are ample and lush, all of this full of the characteristic of the Rococo style. These women appear almost doll-like. Nature is radiant, and it's inhabited here by supposedly cheerful country folk and pleasant lovers. The lovers are not so lovable at the moment when the man is eyeing this new gal with her flowers on her shoulder, carried 2 baskets of flowers, not 1 basket, that would be enough. No, it has to be more than just a little bit. It has to be exuberant, and that is what Rococo is. And by the way, Jacques-Louis David, whose paintings we will look at pretty soon, was taught by Francois Boucher, but he rejected Francois Boucher as being too frivolous, not serious. Now let's look at the next painting by Jacques-Louis David. Many of you may not know Jacques-Louis David, and he's considered to be the preeminent neoclassical painter of the 18th and early 19th centuries. His name is everywhere. He was a revolutionary. He was a Jacobite. He became Napoleon, the Emperor Napoleon's painter of the court, and he developed the empire style. If you go to the Louvre, Jacques-Louis David is everywhere. His paintings are everywhere in the Louvre. He is, again, the preeminent neoclassical painter. Now, who is this guy, Cooper Penrose, and why did Jacques-Louis David, a French painter, paint this man? Cooper Penrose was a prominent Quaker family member from England. He ultimately migrated to Waterford, Ireland, the city where the Waterford crystals made, and he moved there in the 17th century. Penrose became a timber merchant. He inherited his father-in-law's thriving business. He was a Protestant Irish businessman who became very wealthy and also an avid art collector, a generous philanthropist, and he was a Quaker. But Penrose's lavish taste and his worldly interest did not quite fit with the severe moral code of the Quakers. He was an art patron who led a very luxurious lifestyle. He was in fact disowned by the Quakers because of his extravagance. So when Penrose traveled one day to Paris to buy more art, he was introduced to the famous revolutionary Jacobin painter, Jacques-Louis David, who was very famous. Penrose's niece, Julia, was then a student of Jacques-Louis David, and that made it easier for Penrose to visit David's studio at the Louvre. But Julia had to convince David to agree to paint Penrose's portrait. And the finished painting, a 3/4 length portrait, shows Penrose at 63 years of age. He's dressed very soberly in black and some white. He's seated modestly against a plain brown wall. He's dressed in a somber black cutaway jacket, a white waistcoat, dark gray, if not black, breeches, and white stockings. He's seated comfortably in a neoclassical armchair. There's no evidence of the sitter's high social status or of his great wealth or of his frivolous lifestyle. One does notice the self-conscious austerity of the painting. Yes, it's very austere, but look at those little curls on the right and left side of his head. Again, a symbol of perhaps his not so sober lifestyle. And this painting must have pleased the leading Quaker community. Penrose here appears to be a very small man, modest, friendly, and very kind. But look at the veins in his hands, the details of his fingers, his nails. This reveals David's intense classical training, his masterful skill at realistic depiction. This is neoclassical work, and it's very different from his historical paintings. Many of his historical paintings are at the Louvre. David was more than a painter. He was a political activist. He became an active supporter of the French Revolution. Remember, 1789, French Revolution. And he was a member of the Jacobin Club. He voted in the National Convention for the execution of Louis XVI, the king who was around during the French Revolution. After the revolution, and under Robespierre's leadership, David was effectively the dictator of the arts in the French Republic. But when Robespierre fell from power, Robespierre, by the way, was the infamous man who, after the French Revolution led, and before the French Revolution, led the infamous Reign of Terror, people dying, being executed, and blood in the streets of all of Paris. During this period, he was friendly with Robespierre, but when Robespierre fell from power, David was imprisoned and Robespierre was guillotined. But David's wife got him released from prison, even though she was very angry at him for being against the Louis XVI king. But nothing stopped Jacques-Louis David. After prison, he recognized the importance of another political figure developing developing power in France, which was Napoleon Bonaparte. David became the official first court painter of the Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. He had a large number of pupils, including the notable Dominique Ingres and Antoine Jean Gros. Napoleon awarded him France's highest medal of honor. David became a Chevalier de la Légion d'honneur, which is this medal that I showed you earlier, that was given to me by Jacques Chirac, the president of France, because I have done a lot of work trying to keep the great art and the great contributions of France to the literary and artistic world. And remember, Jacques-Louis David learned how to draw from Francois Boucher, but he rejected it as being Rococo, not severe enough. He actually preferred the more severe style of the Greek and Roman classics. But let me stress again, Jacques-Louis David is regarded as a symbol of French national pride and identity, a vital force in the development of European and French art. His portrait is wonderful, but he's known mostly for his historical works, the painting of Napoleon, the coronation of Napoleon. So go to the Louvre when you have a chance to go back to travel after this horrific pandemic that we're suffering from, and see this great painting and the great paintings of Jacques-Louis David. Now we're going to move into the Dutch gallery, and we have a Bruegel, Peter Bruegel the Elder, who depicted the parable of the sower in the 16th century, one of Bruegel's earliest signed religious paintings done before he left for Brussels. And this landscape, in contrast to the pastoral landscape that we saw earlier with Claude Lorrain, this one, painted in the 16th century, is called the cosmic landscape style. But unfortunately, because time is moving, I can't speak too long about it. If you want to know more about it, we can talk later. Let's move on to one of the highlights of the museum, which is our Rembrandt. Now, Rembrandt painted in this work in 1657, smack in the middle of the 17th century, when Louis XIV, Louis XIV, King Louis, the great Sun King, was reigning. Rembrandt was born and studied painting in Leiden. He often treated biblical, historical, and mythical themes in his paintings. He moved to Amsterdam in 1631, where he painted small bust length and large full length portraits. He married a woman named Saskia van Uylenburg, who was the daughter of a very important politician. That's important. And also the cousin of an art dealer. This is how Rembrandt became so wealthy. Rembrandt had 3 sons who unfortunately died before their father died. With his wife's rich dowry, political connections, artistic connections, Rembrandt had artistic success. He lived well in Amsterdam from 1635 to 1640, but he became bankrupt in 1656 after his wife's death in 1642. Nevertheless, he produced hundreds of drawings, etchings, and paintings, and he was a very effective teacher. But his very sad life is reflected in Rembrandt's use of dark colors and very minimal light. Now let's look at this portrait of Saint Bartholomew. It's very large, very dramatic. It's a portrait of a martyr who endured many trials and tribulations, like Rembrandt himself. He suffered at the death of his wife and his 3 sons. Saint Bartholomew also suffered. He carries a butcher's knife in his hand, which is one of the lighter colored objects in this painting. The only light is coming from his face and from his hand, and a little bit from that knife, and of course from his cuff on his sleeve. He carries a butcher's knife in his right hand, and the knife symbolizes the fact that he was flayed alive. He was skinned alive in Armenia. He was one of the 12 apostles, and and Rembrandt did paint independent pictures of many of the apostles throughout his career, and he approached biblical figures as individuals rather than as types. He's very realistic. The apostle appears to be determined, resolute, preoccupied perhaps by spiritual concerns. The fact that he's going to get flayed alive in Armenia is no small matter. His eyes are animated. His brow is furrowed because he's very worried. His mouth is slightly open, as if he's contemplating a deep question of ethical concern. His pose indicates that he is somewhat unsettled by these concerns. In any case, it is an extraordinarily beautiful portrait that penetrates the inner life of this apostle. Rembrandt signed the painting in the mid-left side section of it, and it's the portrait of a holy figure who is portrayed as a real person who has suffered. Rembrandt did not idealize him as a saint, but instead made this apostle seem lifelike and complex. So lifelike, in fact, that every time I look at it, I see Robert De Niro's face. I'm embarrassed to say, but it's true because he's so lifelike here. Now let's go on to the last 2 paintings I'm going to talk about in the American Gallery. Here's Eastman Johnson's The Cranberry Harvest Island of Nantucket, which he painted in 1880, in the last part of the 19th century. Eastman Johnson has been praised as the most American of American painters. He moved to Dusseldorf in 1849 and enrolled in the Royal Academy. He then went to Holland to paint and to learn to paint. He moved to Paris in 1855 to study with another French painter, Thomas Couture, and he finally returned to the United States later that year in 1855, where he concentrated on an American subject matter that would allow him to reveal his European technical achievements, but would be painting genre scenes from the island of Nantucket, Massachusetts, where he and his family spent their summers. The Cranberry Harvest is the culmination of Johnson's Nantucket work, celebrating New England outdoor life. Now let's look at the painting itself. Bright blue sky, bright colors, lots of people bent over, woman standing in the middle of the painting. We see a bog on the north shore of Nantucket Island in this painting, along the region known as the cliff. You see the cliff on the right side of the painting. People in this painting are mostly women, children, and old men. They're picking berries. It's a fun time, but it's also work. The picked berries are then loaded onto a wagon, which you see off to the right of the painting. In the distance, figures singly and in pairs climb the cliff toward North Road. This is a very detailed landscape. In the distance, we see the Nantucket spires, a lighthouse, and shipping. The figures in the foreground are very real, and our attention is drawn to the kneeling cranberry pickers, and of course to the only figure standing, which is a woman with a hat, looking perhaps at an approaching boy carrying an infant, maybe hers. Johnson even painted a windmill on the horizon, left of center, to give us a better idea of the Nantucket landscape. The pickers are wearing very bright colored clothing. They all exchange glances and gestures. The emotion of the people in this painting is very restrained. Copley has an evocative rather than a descriptive technique. This technique gives an air of spontaneous truth to the painting. He wasn't trying to make a political statement about the plight of the cranberry pickers. He painted 17 paintings of these pictures, of these pickers. Now let's look at our last painting, which is, I mentioned earlier, Copley had an evocative style. I meant Eastman Johnson. I was thinking ahead, sorry. This is, the cranberry pickers are by Eastman Johnson. Copley now, the last and one of the most extraordinary paintings in the Timken Museum, John Singleton Copley, who painted a portrait of Mrs. Thomas Gage in 1771 in the United States. Now, this date is very important because you know the revolution, the American Revolution, is going to be fought during very soon in these years. And in July 4th, 1776, we will have the Declaration of Independence, of an independent America. John Singleton Copley has been called the greatest American artist of the 18th century. Eastman Johnson was really painting in 1880, which is the end of the 19th century. So this is earlier in the period of the Revolution. And look at the portrait of Mrs. Thomas Gage. Copley traveled to New York in 1771, where, because of his reputation, he had 17 commissions for portraits. This was the very first work he hastened to do, was this 3/4 length portrait of Mrs. Thomas Gage. And Copley said of his own work, "It's beyond compare the best lady's portrait I have ever drawn." Now, who is this lady? She was referred to as a duchess by her husband and by her fellow officers. Her husband was, and this is very important, he was the commander-in-chief of all the British forces in North America in 1771, while we're just about to engage in the American Revolution. Not good to be British in America when you are, when there's a war about to start. So Mrs. Gage was well known throughout New York and New Jersey for her husband and for her own charm. Copley never painted a woman in such exotic clothing or in such a state of melancholic reverie. Now, what's in the mind of this woman? There's a war out there. My husband's the commander-in-chief. I got to get out of Dodge as soon as possible. And she also has 11 children. That could also add for her melancholic reverie. Mrs. Gage has beautiful white skin, again, a sign of her nobility. She has a very décolleté dress of iridescent rose silk, which loosely covers over a white laced trimmed undergarment known as a chemise. She wears a jeweled brooch at the top of her dress and an embroidered belt at her waist. This dress was quite fashionable in the exotic style of Turkery, in the Turkish style. Mrs. Gage never visited Turkey herself, but her father was born there, and she wears a delicate necklace of 2 small strings of white pearls. Again, pretty moderate. And her headdress is amplified by a turban-like swath of dark, bejeweled drapery. Notice she has pearls around her neck, pearls around on her sleeve, pearls, small pearls everywhere on this woman's body. The costume is voluminous. Her hairstyle is very simple. The sleeve, underneath the sleeves, we see more of the white chemise adorned also with white pearls on her arm. She's a woman of elite social status, an officer's wife, a prominent woman in the region. Here, she's more like a sultana in her very casual pose, her faraway staring gaze, and her glimpse of a smile. With her hand leaning on the elegant blue satin chair with buttons, she seems arrogantly indifferent, engaged perhaps in pensive thought about serious matters involving the revolution. Copley exhibited this portrait in London in 1772, but his friends didn't like it. They said, "Wow, this is the wife of a British commander," and they expected a portrait of such a woman to be less artistic, less beautiful, less informal, and more rigorous likeness of the woman herself. Again, a political influence here. But the lovers of the arts gave the work great praise. The portrait remained in England until the mid 1980s, and the Gages left America, wonder why, in 1775, just before the Declaration of the Independence was signed. And she returned to their primary residence in London, where they raised and educated their 11 children. Mrs. Gage lived in London to the age of 90. Oh my God, the woman had 11 children. She lives to 90. That gives me some hope. And never remarried after her husband's death. And that is the end of my tour. And I hope you liked them. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them if I can. Pretty close to 45 minutes, eh?
Thank you so much, Susan. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
So now at this time, I think we have a couple more minutes to take any questions. If anybody has any, I'm going to check the chat feature right now. So if you, at this moment, you're welcome to unmute yourself. If you have any questions for Susan, I'm sure she'd love to chat and, and try and answer any of your questions. So you're welcome to do that now, and I'll check the chat box as well. So whatever your preference is.
And the pictures of all of you on my screen are very lovely indeed. Thank you, Ginny. Let me say that again. The Immaculate Conception was when?
Just a clarification, the Immaculate Conception is when Mary was conceived without sin. Many people are confused about this.
Oh, really? When Mary was conceived? Although it was when Jesus was conceived that they refer to the Immaculate. I may be wrong. I'm not Christian, so I don't know. I bow to Roseanne Carbonaro, who says this. She probably knows more than I do about it.
We have a request to hear more about the Supreme Court judges, who I'm sure you.
I knew you were going to ask. Well, I'd be happy to say that I knew, Antonin Scalia very well. He slept in my house 5 times. He came to my Nice program where I teach international law now. This year, I'm leaving on May 7th to go to Nice again for the 28th year. And each year we had a Supreme Court justice. So the first one was Antonin Scalia in 1994. At the end of that wonderful, wonderful time with him, he's a very educated man, and his French was pretty good. He knew a lot about opera, knew a lot about music, and loved good food, by the way. And he was just absolutely one of the most delightful people. We never talked politics. My politics and his were not the same, but we got along very famously. And he said to me at the end of the 2 weeks that we worked together, he taught in my program for 2 full weeks. So you can imagine how well I got to know him and his lovely wife, Maureen Scalia. And he said to me, "Susan, you're so wonderful. What can I do for you?" And I said, "Nino, you're asking me what you can do for me? Get me Ruth Bader Ginsburg for next year." And he said, "You want me to get Ruth? I can get Ruth. She does whatever I want." Sure enough, in 1995, Ruth Bader Ginsburg came. And the two of them were, notably very good friends. They had New Year's Eve together every year. Ruth and Scalia were both extremely brilliant, highly educated, very cultivated. Ruth spoke a little bit of French and loved going to the Matisse Museum, and she loved sports. She did all kinds of, which drove me completely crazy because I'm in charge of her, right? If anything goes wrong, I kill Ruth Bader Ginsburg. This is not good. So I was very careful about limiting her heavy duty sports activities, but she was an amazing person. I got to know her very well, very well. She, again, came to my house 5 times, slept in the Ruth Bader Ginsburg bed. It's the same bedroom, but Scalia came first and Ruth Bader Ginsburg came after. They never came together, but they always occupied the same bathroom and at the same bedroom rather. anyway, she was quite a gal, absolutely a workaholic. She never stopped working, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was a lovely person. She had a fabulous marriage with Marty Ginsburg, who was the tax attorney for Russ Perot. He was a very, very wealthy man, and they had a very wonderful marriage. He absolutely adored her, and that's what I take from that woman. She just was a brilliant, hardworking, never stopped working, always studying, always excited by art and music. She and I used to go to the Santa Fe Opera season in August together, and we were very good friends. And I was very sad when she died. I was also very sad Antonin Scalia died in 2016 on February 13th. Why? He was my good friend, but he was supposed to be coming to Nice that June, and so my distinguished guest lecturer was gone, and his friend and other judge who justice who both of them went to mass every morning at 6 a.m. Scalia and Clarence Thomas. Although Clarence Thomas at that time said very, very little. He basically shared the views of Scalia and let Scalia do all the talking. But they sent me Clarence Thomas. So I not only knew Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I not only knew Antonin Scalia, but I also knew Clarence Thomas. So I knew 3 out of the 9 justices. And I can tell you stories about them that'll make you laugh, but I don't think we have time.
I think we are just out of time now. We're at about 12:02, so we're 2 minutes over. We have just one question asking about the date of the museum opening. We do not have a date yet to announce. Hopefully soon, and hopefully we'll be able to get that date to you soon. But as of right now, we do not have an answer. And so with that, I think that that's just about all the questions we have time for at the moment. I want to thank you again, Susan, for giving us this talk and sharing your knowledge and your stories with us. I want to thank everybody for coming to watch our talk. And then I also just wanted to say next Thursday, again at 11 a.m., we have another docent talk entitled The Conquest of Reality, Early Netherlandish Painting. So if you have time, we'd love to see you then as well. And with that, I think we'll end it here.
Bye now. See you next Wednesday, Blythe. And thank you for all your help.
Yes, bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.